One of the things that I think we haven't really calculated yet is how far the Iranians are willing to go um, apart from the battlefield. Again, one of these situations where whether you like Iran or not, whether you respect Iran or not, whether you side with Iran or not, the historical fact is that the Iranians commit acts of terrorism around the world. They have against the United States and against a slew of other countries. So if your goal is regime change now, and the Iranian government calculates that it cannot defeat the Israelis, I would bet money on the fact that the Iranians then turn to terrorism. So rather than to fight the Israelis on the battlefield, how do you protect every diplomatic facility that you have around the world? How do you protect every Jewish cultural center around the world? Are we going to see repeats of what we saw in the 1990s in Argentina, for example? Are we going to see embassy bombings? Are we going to see kidnappings of prominent Jewish businessmen, let's say? Or what does it mean for the United States? There was an incident in the 1990s where the United States had been in some sort of a skirmish with the Iranians, and the Iranian response was to murder 7 American oil workers in Karachi, Pakistan. How do you protect against something like that? You can't. So if the Israelis are serious about regime change, by God, they better accomplish it soon, or they're in for something bad outside of the battlefield.
Beyond the closing or the attempted closing of the Strait of Hormuz, because that would obviously, I wouldn't say cripple the global economy, but severely harm it. But it could get a lot worse than that, and that is striking US interests and European interests around the world, and that could lead to global destabilization. And as you said, China and Russia won't stand idle. You know, Russia, I think Iran's under Russia's nuclear umbrella at one point.
Correct.
They also have a defense pact. China and Iran is part of BRICS. China and Iran have a lot of business relations. So I think if they're looking for regime change and it becomes an existential threat for Khamenei, it could end up being very ugly for the world. Because right now the world is dismissing the impact this could have on the economy. The markets are doing relatively well, and the world seems to be moving on. But it could get a lot worse if Iran is not given an out.
I think you're exactly right. I think that is exactly right. And I'm so glad that you brought up the Straits of Hormuz. I should have written myself a little note to bring this up. Many of your viewers, I think, are probably too young to remember when the Iranians tried to close the Straits of Hormuz in the mid-1980s. Ronald Reagan was president of the United States at the time. And what Reagan did was unprecedented in our relations with Persian Gulf countries. He ordered the U.S. Navy into the Strait of Hormuz to escort oil cargo ships through the straits. And the straits are very narrow. They're only about 25 kilometers where they go north and then south to go around the Musandam Peninsula of Oman. And so this was considered by the Iranians at the time to be an act of war, right? You're almost in Iranian territorial waters. Not quite, but almost. So you have to sort of thread this needle as you're escorting these oil tankers through the straits. We could do that again. We might be forced to do that again. This time, it might be a little bit more hostile because in 1985 and 1986, you didn't have Iranian naval vessels firing rockets at American ships. We don't know if that's going to happen, in the near future or not, but it's something that's going to have to be taken into consideration. So in the event that the Iranians try to close the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. Navy is already there, and it will escort every one of those oil tankers through.
Going to Russia and China, how involved do you think they could get?
Man, this is really the proverbial $64,000 question. Iranian relations with Russia and China are far, far closer than they have been at any other point where the U.S. and Iran have faced conflict. As you said correctly, Iran's a member of BRICS now. That's a big deal. Iran falls under the Russian nuclear umbrella. That's also a big deal that we didn't have to deal with in the past. China's the wild card here for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Chinese, Tibet aside, the Chinese generally do not have an imperialist foreign policy. They've had little border skirmishes with the Vietnamese, a couple of skirmishes with the Indians, but they're generally not one to project military power abroad. They have one permanent military base overseas, which, crazy as it might sound, they share with the United States. That's Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. So, on the face of things, I wouldn't expect the Chinese to commit troops or planes or anything like that. I would expect them to commit troops, but not combat troops, troops to replace Iranian troops. Let's say the Iranian government's in danger of falling. I could see the Chinese sending, we'll call them peacekeeping troops for the purpose of this conversation, that would free up Iranian troops to go fight the fight. I could see that happening. But I think that the more immediate threat to the West would be from Russia. If the Russians aren't overextended in Ukraine, then it's a possibility they could do something more substantive to help the Iranians.
And do you think that significantly weakens Russia's position in the war in Ukraine? Because Iran is no longer supplying weapons to Russia.
I do. And we know, of course, that the Russians are reliant, at least in part, on North Korean troops. There have been rumors that there are Chinese troops on the ground. So yeah, I think it would weaken Russia. And the Russians have been talking just over the last couple of days about Odessa. And we all thought that Odessa was off the table. Now maybe it's not off the table.
Do you think they could also leverage the negotiations? So Putin leverages the peace negotiations with Trump, and China leverages the tariff negotiations to try to twist America's hand or Trump's arm into forcing or pressuring Israel to stop the war?
That's a great question, and I think the answer is yes. And I think Putin knows Trump better than Trump knows Putin, and I think Putin understands that Trump is motivated by the prospect of a grand deal, a grand, overarching agreement, an agreement that might include Ukraine and tariffs and Iran and whatever else Putin might be interested in at any given time. I think it's a way to sort of suck Trump in. Yes.
Another way of looking at it, just thought of it now, is that this could be Trump adding a good card to his hand by adding a piece in Iran as part of the chips that Trump could offer Russia in the negotiations. So that could work in Trump's advantage. So Israel, one could argue, I'm not saying I agree with it, but one could argue Israel is somehow, at least for now, doing a favor for the US. It helps Trump. If they reach a deal now, if Trump reaches a deal now with Iran, Trump could declare victory. The US did not get involved. They got a deal with Iran. If that deal played a role in Trump's negotiations with Putin, it gave him leverage there. So that could end up being a positive for the US. And on the other hand, if this war does drag on, if they are looking for regime change, I think that's a loss for literally every party involved.
I couldn't agree more.
Let's break down. I'm going to read out an analysis here and get your thoughts on it. It's a long one. I don't know if I'll read it all, but it's an interesting analysis. I might break it down into different parts and get your thoughts on it. And that's Israel's success with this operation. It's just been pretty outstanding to see. So Israel's preemptive military operation against Iran appears to have severely crippled Iran's missile command structure and its capacity to retaliate following a complex deception campaign led by Israeli intelligence. So let's go through that one first. So do you think the deception that happened beforehand, including Trump talking about a peace deal, he thinks an agreement will be reached? I think Prime Minister Netanyahu pretended his son had a wedding, or maybe his son didn't have a wedding, and pretended he's going to have a meeting in the US. Do you think all these were part of a disinformation campaign against Iran? And there's also been rumors that, I'm not sure if it's in that analysis, that, this is someone as well. According to sources familiar with the operation, Mossad initiated a targeted disinformation effort days before the strike using falsified communications through Iranian